The sun was setting on the distant horizon, casting a warm orange glow across the alien landscape. A small, rugged border station stood in the middle of nowhere, surrounded by tall metallic fences and strange, glowing lights. It was the only gateway between the human world and the alien planet beyond. As the wind picked up, a human woman, young and determined, walked up to the border. She carried nothing but a small bag and a stack of papers. Her heart raced. She had always dreamed of crossing into this alien world, hoping to find a new life far away from the struggles back home. This was her chance, her one shot at a fresh start. But standing before the station's towering gates, she could feel her nerves getting the best of her. She had heard stories of the strict alien border officers, how they never let anyone pass without good reason. Inside the station, Officer Zarnak stood at his post, a tall and intimidating figure with cold, calculating eyes. He had worked at the border for years, and the rules had always been clear. No one enters unless they meet the strictest of criteria. He glanced over his paperwork, running his fingers through his long black hair. His job was simple: deny anyone who didn't belong. There was no room for compassion here. The human woman reached the window, her hands trembling slightly as she presented her documents. Zarnak studied them closely, his gaze sharp and unwavering. He could sense her nervousness, but he didn't let it sway him. He had seen countless faces like hers, people desperate to escape their lives, people willing to do anything for a chance. But the law was the law. "You do not meet the required conditions for entry," Zarnak said, his voice deep and emotionless. He handed back her papers, his expression unreadable. "You will have to turn back." The woman's face fell. She couldn't believe it. This was her chance, her last hope. "Please," she begged, her voice shaking. "I just want a better life. Please let me in." Zarnak's eyes softened for a moment, but only for a split second. His duty was clear. "I'm sorry," he replied coldly, his gaze returning to the paperwork in front of him. "You cannot enter." She stood there for a moment, stunned and speechless. Tears welled up in her eyes, but she quickly wiped them away. She knew it was no use. With a defeated sigh, she turned around and walked back toward the gates, her dreams crushed. Zarnak watched her leave, his mind already returning to the pile of work on his desk. But as the gate shut behind her, he couldn't shake the strange feeling in his chest. He had made the right call, hadn't he? Yet something gnawed at him, an unfamiliar feeling of doubt. He shook it off. There was no time for second-guessing. But deep down, Zarnak couldn't help but wonder, what if he had just made a mistake? The woman walked away from the gates, the weight of defeat pressing heavily on her shoulders. Her dreams of a new life in this strange alien world were slipping away with each step. She kept her head down, trying to push through the sting of rejection. The cold wind tugged at her clothes as she wandered down a narrow path. The tall metal walls of the border station looming behind her like a silent reminder of her failure. As she walked, the quiet of the alien landscape made her feel even more alone. The sun was almost gone now, and the twilight shadows stretched long across the ground. Her steps grew slower, each one heavier than the last. She had nowhere to go, no place to turn. She wasn't ready to return to the life she had left behind, but she didn't know where else to go. The thoughts swirled in her mind, and a wave of hopelessness threatened to consume her. But then, just as she rounded a corner, a sudden movement caught her eye. From the shadows, a group of alien figures stepped forward, their faces hidden beneath dark, hooded cloaks. They circled around her, their eyes glowing faintly in the dimming light. There was something in their posture, something threatening in the way they moved toward her. Panic surged through her chest as she backed away, but the group was fast. Before she could react, one of them grabbed her arm, pulling her toward the others. Her heart raced and her breath came in sharp gasps. She had no idea who they were, but they weren't here to help. "Let go of me," she cried, her voice shaking with fear. She struggled to free herself, but their grip was unyielding, their hands cold and firm. "Quiet," one of them growled in a language she couldn't understand. His voice was low and menacing. The others stood around her, their glowing eyes fixed on her, sizing her up like a predator would eye its prey. Fear twisted in her stomach, but she didn't give up. She kicked out with all the strength she had left, landing a blow to the alien's shin. He grunted and loosened his grip for a moment, just enough for her to slip free. She turned and ran, her heart pounding in her chest, her breath coming in ragged gasps. The alien group didn't give up. She could hear their footsteps behind her, growing louder as they chased after her. She didn't know where she was going, but she had to keep moving. The sounds of the pursuit filled her ears, drowning out everything else. Then, as if by chance, her foot caught on a loose stone and she tumbled to the ground. Pain shot through her knee, but before she could regain her bearings, one of the aliens was on her, pulling her up by her arm. She could feel the cold breath of the others on her skin as they closed in. Their intentions clear. Just when she thought it was all over, a blinding flash of light streaked past her and the alien holding her froze. A loud, sharp crack echoed through the air. She looked up, her heart stopping. It was him, the border officer. Zarnak. He had appeared out of nowhere, his weapon raised and aimed straight at the alien that had her in its grip. The others backed away, sensing the threat, but they didn't leave. Instead, they snarled, their glowing eyes narrowing with anger. Zarnak didn't hesitate. His hand steady, he fired again. The alien scattered, disappearing into the shadows. He turned to her, his face unreadable as she stared at him, still kneeling on the ground. His actions were swift, calculated. He had saved her, even though just moments ago he had denied her entry. "Are you all right?" His voice was calm, but there was something different in it now, something softer than before. She nodded, her throat tight with disbelief. "Why did you—" "I couldn't just stand by," he said, his gaze intense. "I made a mistake." The silence that followed was thick with unspoken words. The woman stood there, still processing what had just happened. Zarnak, the border officer who had turned her away without a second thought, was now standing before her, his weapon lowered. His expression a mix of confusion and something deeper, something she couldn't quite place. She had been ready to accept her fate, to be left in the cold, alone. But now, here he was, the man who had denied her, standing as her unexpected savior. The irony of it all wasn't lost on her. "I didn't ask for this," she whispered, her voice shaking. She wasn't sure whether she was talking about the attack or his sudden intervention, but it didn't matter. It was happening, and she had no control over it. Zarnak's eyes flickered with something like regret, but his face remained stoic. He took a step closer, studying her as if he were trying to figure out what to say, how to explain his actions. The woman wanted to say something, anything, about how unfair this all was, about how he had denied her when she had come to him for help. But the words caught in her throat. "I didn't expect this," he said quietly, almost to himself. "I never imagined this would happen. You should have been safe after I sent you away." She met his gaze, her confusion mixing with the anger she'd tried so hard to suppress. "What changed?" Her voice was sharp now, more assertive. "You had a job to do, didn't you? You followed orders and turned me away without a thought. Now you're here, saving me. Why?" He hesitated, his hand still gripping the weapon but relaxed now, as though he weren't sure whether to put it away or keep it ready. "I thought I was doing the right thing. The law is the law, but—" He paused, his jaw tightening. "When I saw you out there, when I saw what they were doing to you, I couldn't just stand by. I had to help." The woman looked down at the dirt beneath her, her mind racing. "So what now? Are you going to apologize? Offer me a place to stay, maybe? Because that's not how this works." She shook her head, her bitterness rising. "I don't need your pity." Zarnak's gaze softened, his face betraying the conflict that brewed inside him. "I'm not offering pity. I don't know what to offer. I acted on instinct, and I'm sorry for what I did earlier." His voice was steady, but there was a certain rawness to it now, a vulnerability she hadn't expected from him. "Maybe I shouldn't have turned you away. Maybe I shouldn't have followed those rules without questioning them." She took a step back, not knowing what to make of his words. A part of her wanted to scream at him, to tell him how much his decision had cost her, how she had trusted him in that brief moment, and he had failed her. But another part of her, a part that had long ago learned not to trust anyone, felt a strange stir of understanding. He wasn't just a soldier following orders. There was more to him than that. And for reasons she didn't fully understand, that realization unsettled her even more. "I don't know what to say," she finally admitted, her voice softer now. I don't even know who you are anymore. Zarnak met her eyes, his expression guarded yet sincere. I don't know who I am either. The air between them hung heavy, charged with the strange tension of two strangers caught in an unexpected moment of vulnerability. Neither of them knew what would come next, but for the first time, it felt like they both had a choice. The night stretched on, the cold wind whispering through the empty landscape as Zarnak and the woman stood there, each processing the unexpected turn of events. She had managed to gather her thoughts, but the confusion and uncertainty still lingered in the pit of her stomach. The officer's sudden change of heart left her reeling, and yet there was something in his eyes that made her pause. It wasn't pity. It wasn't even just guilt. It was something else, something deeper. She couldn't place it, but she was starting to wonder if she even cared. Why did you do it? She asked quietly, breaking the silence that had settled between them. The words slipped out before she could stop them, raw and unfiltered. Why risk your life for someone you didn't even want to help in the first place? Zarnak didn't answer immediately. Instead, he glanced at the ground as if trying to find the right words to make sense of everything that had just happened. I don't know, he said after a long pause, his voice low. Something about your eyes. I saw a desperation in them, a kind of helplessness I couldn't ignore. Her brows furrowed, but she remained silent, unsure of how to respond. She hadn't expected this, hadn't expected him to speak so openly, so honestly. She was used to dealing with people who kept their walls high, their emotions hidden behind layers of duty and cold professionalism. But this man, this officer, was different. His words weren't rehearsed, and they weren't meant to placate her. They were real, and that unsettled her even more. I've never questioned my duty before, Zarnak continued, his voice distant now, as if he were talking to himself more than to her. The rules were clear. The law was clear. But when I saw you, something in me wanted to change that, wanted to do something different. He shook his head, as if the thought itself confused him. I don't know what that means yet, but I can't shake the feeling that what happened here tonight was meant to happen. The woman couldn't help but wonder if he was simply justifying his actions, making excuses for stepping outside the boundaries of his rigid life. But there was no arrogance in his voice, no sense of pride in what he had done. Only confusion, and maybe even regret. So what happens now? She asked, her voice quiet but firm. She needed to know. After everything that had transpired, she couldn't just stand in limbo, waiting for the next twist of fate to hit her. Zarnak looked at her, his eyes softening. I don't know. I can't let you go back out there, not like this. Not after what happened. She met his gaze, searching for something, an answer perhaps. But all she saw was uncertainty, much like her own. And what do you expect me to do? She asked, her voice tinged with frustration. You've already made it clear you don't want me here. You turned me away once. Why should I trust you now? Zarnak's jaw clenched, and for a moment he looked like he was about to say something. But then he exhaled slowly, as if resigning himself to the truth. I can't make you trust me, but I'll do what I can to make it right, for whatever that's worth. There was an awkward stillness between them, neither knowing how to bridge the gap that had grown between them over the past few hours. The weight of their unspoken thoughts hung heavily in the air, thick with uncertainty. I don't know what the future holds, he said, his voice softer now. But I'm not going to turn my back on you again. She looked away, her mind racing. She couldn't afford to trust him, not yet. Not after everything. But deep down, she knew something had shifted in her too. She wasn't sure if it was hope or something else, but she couldn't deny it. There was a fragile thread of connection between them now, thin but real. And for the first time in a long while, she wasn't sure if that was a good or a bad thing. The first light of dawn stretched across the horizon, casting a pale glow over the landscape. The air was still, yet thick with the unspoken tension that had settled between Zarnak and the woman. They had stayed the night in a small, deserted shelter just outside the border station. Neither of them had spoken much after their conversation, both lost in their thoughts. The woman sat by the window, gazing out at the quiet expanse of alien terrain, her mind drifting. She had been so sure of herself before, certain of her path, her purpose. Now everything seemed uncertain. The events of the last few hours had shaken her to her core, and she couldn't shake the feeling that she was caught in a storm, caught between two worlds. The world she had left behind, and this strange, new one that seemed to hold nothing but confusion and danger. Zarnak was standing near the door, staring out into the same horizon, his posture stiff and unreadable. She wondered what was going through his mind. He had saved her life, and yet his actions still didn't make sense. He had turned her away without a second thought, and now here he was, standing beside her, as though everything had changed. But had it? Was it possible to erase the past with one heroic act, or did it take more than that? He turned to her suddenly, breaking the silence that had stretched on too long. "I've been thinking," he began, his voice low, almost hesitant. "About the decision I made. The one that led to all this." The woman's heart skipped a beat. She hadn't expected him to bring it up again, not so soon. "And what did you come up with?" she asked, her voice guarded. Zarnak shifted his weight, clearly uncomfortable. "I was just doing my job," he said, though his words seemed hollow, lacking the certainty they once had. "I followed orders, didn't question anything. But now, I can't stop asking myself why I didn't think it through. Why I didn't consider who you were or what you were running from. It feels like a mistake now, like I've done something I can't take back." She turned to face him, her expression softening. She had expected him to brush off his actions, to continue hiding behind his sense of duty, but he wasn't. He was acknowledging his mistake, something she didn't think she would ever hear from someone like him. "You're not the only one who made a mistake," she said quietly. "I thought I had everything figured out, too. I thought that if I just showed up here, everything would fall into place, but it didn't. I'm just as lost as you are." The words hung between them, and for a moment the distance between them seemed to shrink. The woman didn't know why she felt the need to share this with him, but somehow it felt like the right thing to do. She had always been used to standing alone, to fighting her battles in silence. But now, in the presence of this stranger, this officer, she felt something she hadn't felt in a long time. Understanding. Zarnak's gaze softened, and for the first time she saw a flicker of empathy in his eyes. "I know," he said, his voice low. "I know what it feels like to be trapped by something bigger than yourself. I thought I could follow the rules and everything would be fine. But now, I'm starting to see how those rules can trap you, how they can blind you." His admission surprised her. She hadn't expected him to open up, not after everything that had happened. But there it was, a crack in the armor he had built around himself. And suddenly she found herself wondering if maybe, just maybe, they weren't so different after all. For a long time, neither of them spoke. The silence wasn't uncomfortable, though. It was the kind of quiet that filled a space with possibilities, with the unspoken understanding that both of them were on the edge of something bigger than themselves, something that neither of them could predict. Finally, Zarnak broke the silence. "I can't change the past," he said quietly, "but I can try to make things right, if you'll let me." The woman studied him for a long moment, her mind racing with thoughts of trust and betrayal, of hope and fear. She had no answers, no guarantees, but for the first time in a long while, she felt the weight of possibility, and it was enough to make her take a step forward. "I don't know what that means," she said slowly, her voice softer now, "but I'm willing to find out." The days that followed felt like a blur. Zarnak and the woman moved carefully, cautiously, their every step measured as if they were walking through a land of fragile trust. They didn't speak much about the past, about the things they'd done to each other. What mattered now was survival and the strange alliance that had formed between them. They made their way through the alien landscape, avoiding the border patrols, the same officers who had followed the very rules that had once condemned her. Zarnak's presence seemed to shield her from the world, a silent protector whose conflicted feelings about duty were now shaped by the uncertainty of what lay ahead. At night, they would rest in whatever shelter they could find, an abandoned outpost, an old warehouse, or a quiet corner of the wilderness. Each moment of silence between them wasn't awkward anymore. It felt like a kind of understanding, an unspoken agreement that they were in this together for better or for worse. But the longer they spent together, the more complicated things became. Zarnak started to show glimpses of the man beneath the uniform, the one who questioned the world he had been trained to defend, the one who had found his conscience in the face of the woman he had once rejected. His strength wasn't just in his weaponry or his training, it was in the vulnerability that flickered in his eyes whenever he looked at her. A vulnerability he hadn't allowed himself to feel until now. The woman, too, changed. She began to see Zarnak not just as the cold officer who had denied her, but as someone struggling with his own battle, a battle between the rigidity of the rules and the unpredictability of human emotions. She had come here with one goal in mind, to find freedom, a fresh start. But now, with Zarnak by her side, her path felt unclear, like the ground beneath her feet was shifting. One evening, as the two of them sat around a small fire they'd managed to make, Zarnak spoke again. "I've been thinking about the bigger picture," he said, his voice thoughtful. "About why we're both here. Why we crossed paths." The woman didn't answer at first. She had been lost in her thoughts, but the sincerity in his voice pulled her attention back. "What do you mean?" she asked, her voice almost a whisper in the stillness of the night. Zarnak looked at her, his eyes steady but searching. "I think there's more at stake than just our lives. There's something bigger happening, something I didn't see before. I'm starting to wonder if we were meant to meet like this, to make a choice. A choice." The word hung in the air, a heavy burden they both understood but hadn't yet accepted. She looked away, staring into the flickering flames as they danced before her. "I don't know what choice you're talking about," she said quietly. "But I know we can't go back to what we were before." Zarnak nodded slowly, his gaze lingering on her. "No, we can't. But we can move forward. Together. We have to decide what that looks like." The woman's heart raced, not from fear, but from something else, something unfamiliar. For the first time, she wasn't alone in this journey. Zarnak, with all his doubts and uncertainties, was with her. And maybe, just maybe, that would be enough to face whatever came next. The night was quiet, far too quiet for the tension that hung in the air. Zarnak and the woman stood at the edge of a cliff, staring out at the vast, unfamiliar landscape stretching out before them. Below, the lights of the distant city shimmered like tiny stars, far enough away to seem peaceful, but close enough to remind them of what they were up against. They had made it this far, but both knew the hardest part was yet to come. The conspiracy Zarnak had hinted at was real, an underground network of powerful individuals within the alien government who sought to control everything, including the fate of humanity. They had uncovered pieces of the puzzle, but the picture was still incomplete. What they knew was that they couldn't trust anyone, not even the people who had once been allies. "We can't turn back now," Zarnak said quietly, his voice barely above a whisper. He stood beside her, his eyes fixed on the horizon, his face shadowed by the weight of everything they had discovered. The woman nodded, her heart heavy with the same realization. They had come this far together, but what came next would test everything they had built. There were no guarantees, no promises that they would succeed, but there was no turning back. She couldn't let the fear of what might happen hold her back any longer. "Do you really think we can do this?" she asked, her voice low, a mix of doubt and determination. "Expose them? Bring it all to light?" Zarnak glanced at her, his expression unreadable, but there was something in his eyes, something strong, something that spoke of belief. "I don't know. But I do know that if we don't try, nothing will change. And I won't live with the thought that I didn't do everything I could." For a moment, the silence between them was heavy, but it wasn't uncomfortable. It was the kind of quiet that comes after understanding, after the truth has been spoken, no matter how difficult it is. They were in this together. They didn't know what would happen next, but they couldn't stop now. The woman took a deep breath, feeling the weight of her own decisions settle in her chest. "We'll do it," she said firmly. "We'll expose them. No matter what it takes." Zarnak nodded, a hint of a smile tugging at the corner of his lips. "Together, then." And just like that, the bond between them deepened. There was no more uncertainty, no more hesitation. They had found their purpose, their mission. It wasn't just about survival anymore. It was about changing the world, about standing up for something bigger than themselves. The journey ahead would be dangerous, but they had each other, and for the first time, that was enough. They turned away from the edge of the cliff, their path ahead uncertain, but filled with the promise of something more, something worth fighting for.